We're joined today by
J.R. Romano.
Hello, everyone. J.R. Romano here with the Connecticut Republican Party. First of all, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I decided to do things a little different, and this is something I've talked about with our current guest here for a little bit. Michael Chambers, as I know affectionately as Mickey, because we've known each other probably about 20 years. Mick is an attorney in Hartford, and Mick, I feel like we should have like a lunch tray in front of us, going back to our days at Trinity and having these philosophical discussions in Mather Hall. But I really thought that from two perspectives that my audience might benefit from having constructive conversation. And I think more often than not, we have a lot of Americans that are talking past each other versus actually having open conversations and dialogue about where we can help each other. And, I know you and I have had obviously heated discussions, but I just thought that I'd give you a minute to kind of introduce yourself, and we can start the talk.
Thanks, JR. I'm Michael Chambers Jr., originally from Bloomfield, Connecticut. As I said, I went to Trinity College with JR, product of the Loomis Chaffee School and Quinnipiac School of Law. Lived in Connecticut, born and raised my entire life. I am not a professional politician or talking head,
You're a lawyer.
I won't have as many fancy statistics and numbers to draw from. But I like to think that I'm a very reasonable person. I also like to think that I'm a fair person. And, with my training, both undergrad and law school, I'm trained to always look at, understand the other side of the coin. But I also, is who I am as a person, I like to listen to people rather than thinking about what I'm going to say next. So I think that's kind of missing in today's society, whereas everyone seems to be trying to outpoint people rather than to take a minute to really listen to why people are saying what they're saying. Now, I think there's way too much people around in the world today saying, well, this is my truth. Well, your truth might just be wrong, factually wrong, right? Left and right are relative. East and west are a thing, right? You can't be like, well, this is my east. No, it's not. That's north, bro. So, I kind of approach life in that, guys, and that's how I kind of govern myself.
Well, yeah, and for those listening and watching, Mick is not an ideologue. He's not this hardcore leftist. He's what I guess I'll describe as a classic liberal, and because we want to get to the truth and perspective. And one of the things, I know obviously with the tragic death of George Floyd, and you and I talked a little bit about this. I kind of wanted to get your perspective on, and national politics aside, what do you think is probably the most important thing that as societies, as cities, as states that we should be doing? Because I may have an entirely different perspective on what the actual problem is than what most would have, but I'll get to that. And I just kind of want to give you an opportunity to touch on this a little bit, because that's what's kind of sparked us to kind of come together and have these conversations about race, power, and politics, basically.
Right. Well, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of stuff that's happening, it's not new, right? It's not new. It's not a novel problem in today's society or American society. It's just the invention of the cell phone and people being able to record instantly and instantaneously deliver a product to the consumer, right? You don't have to get a videotape and then call your news person and say, hey, I've got this great story. And then you're at the mercy of a newspaper writer the next morning printing about it, or whether Channel 6 or Channel 4 wants to put it up. You can, as a consumer, can now get on the internet and upload it to your YouTube or your Facebook, and you will be in front of tens of millions of people immediately if people try to or want to consume it. So a lot of times when people thought or believe now this kind of stuff doesn't happen, or you're over exaggerating, or it's just not true, now you're seeing situations where individuals are saying, no, that it happened, and this is my video proof to go behind it. So we now have the problem of now people interpreting things 5 million ways, which sometimes I can't understand, and I'm sure we can get into comments made by certain people where you say, listen, this individual said X, Y, and Z. How are you interpreting it a different way? It's in black and white, or it's in video. That's another thing. If you don't want to accept that, then all bets are off. But if you're a reasonable human being and you can step back and you can say, all right, well, I've got videotapes, I've got statistics, I've got anecdotes, and maybe there are some issues, and they need to be addressed. So I think that's the first thing that I think that's really brought a lot of it more in the public spheres and perspective,
You know,
is just the
I
handheld
actually,
recording
I
device.
kind of agree with that. And I think then once you start looking at these situations, and now it turns into a debate of circumstances. Like for me personally, and I've certainly watched and seen bad cops interact with my friends in college and do things that certainly were not justifiable or ethical, which is why I think body cams are essential and vital, that every police department in the country, not only to protect, say, someone that they're interacting with, but also protect the cops. I think
Absolutely,
it's
100%.
a worthwhile investment. But I think in regards to the whole, because one of the things I want to kind of hone in on, Mick, is you said that this has been happening and will continue to happen, and I agree with you.
Well, I didn't say continue on happening. I
I think it
said it's
will.
happening, but okay, continue.
I think it
I
will.
don't disagree with it, but I didn't say it.
Because here, now this is where we may disagree. Here's why I think it'll continue to happen, for two reasons. One is what you're seeing is the dark underbelly to unions. There are plenty of officers that should not remain on a force, but because there are union protections, they protect bad employees. At one point in American history, unions were 100% necessary. They were needed to protect American workers, but more and more you're seeing these situations where a union is protecting, that guy should have been on the job. He had a decade's worth of disciplinary issues, but the union, and I support the police. They have one of the hardest jobs. And from my perspective, though, is that the union is allowing bad cops to stay on the force, which makes things 10 times worse. And the second thing, and these are the two things that are, from my perspective, are not being addressed in this discussion. It's the union issue. And then the second issue is, let's take the examples of like George Floyd or Eric Gardner, right? These are, to me, what's happening in inner cities. You have bad education, you have lack of opportunity. You have a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet. They want to feed their family like everybody else, right? They need to pay their bills. And so they end up getting into these ticky-tack situations. Like Eric Gardner, the cop showed up because he was selling cigarettes illegally. He wasn't robbing anybody. He wasn't doing anything. And so because there's this lack of opportunity within inner cities, and for me, I blame the Democratic Party, who have failed at quality of education in cities. And you have more often than not businesses leaving. It's harder to open a small business in Hartford. Taxes for like a barber. I mean, our office left Hartford because of the property taxes. A lot of people don't understand that aspect to it. So I don't think until we address, one, the union issue, and two, just the education and opportunity gap for communities of color, nothing's going to change. That's just my personal opinion.
I disagree with that, because you can have an education gap and you can have employment opportunities. It doesn't change what an officer ability or lack of ability of interacting with an individual is. So whether I graduated from Hartford High, I graduated from Loomis Shafee, I graduated from Northwest Catholic, it shouldn't matter. If a police officer's job is ultimately to protect and to serve, I don't think that we get to those places. And I'm the first person to say there's certain professions I'm very hesitant to critique. Our police officers, one of them, and the service, right? Unless I'm willing to grab the gun and stand on the wall, you kind of have to be careful.
It's a hard job.
It's a hard job, right? But I have a hard job too, and everybody has difficulties and challenges in their jobs as well. But an individual who may or may not have been involved with a $20 bill that's counterfeit doesn't deserve to be dead at the end of that altercation. You can bring up his entire criminal history to me. If he didn't have a weapon on him, if he wasn't doing anything particularly violent, that individual is entitled to due process under the law, period. And due process for a counterfeit $20 bill is a misdemeanor, punishable to maybe a year in prison or maybe a fine, but it's definitely not a death sentence. So what his past was, unless you caught him with a weapon, and unless he was in the process of committing a robbery, none of that had anything to do with the fact that this man was in handcuffs, he was been restrained, and he was secured. There was no reason to continue to apply a knee to the back of his neck, especially after one of the guys in the force supposedly on body camera says, hey, we don't have a pulse, and you keep going, and you sit there, and you with your hand in your pocket, and you're looking like you have all the power of the world, and you're dissatisfied. And I'm going to sit here, and neither an officer next to me nor the public that's videotaping me can stop me. I mean, the level of power and discontent, and I'm above the world, for you to sit there and look back at these people on camera who tell you, I can't, this guy can't breathe, and not even respond and say I don't have to listen, is incredible.
That goes back to my original. That goes back to the number one problem that is not being addressed, though, and that's that union protection. Where does that arrogance come from? Is the fact that that cop. I'm not even saying
is that union problem, or is that start for basic training? First of all, is that something that should have been basically trained in an individual? I mean,
I think you would agree in every profession there's going to be 15 to 20% that are not, because just in the general population, I'm going to quote Joe Biden here, there's bad people in the world, right?
Yeah, great. But listen, I'm going to quote Chris Rock and say that American Airlines can't tell us that, we got a few bad apples that don't like to land planes, right? Like there's certain professions that you just can't have bad apples.
No, I completely agree.
Police is one of those.
I completely
agree.
When
I have a bad day at the office, people go to jail for years. I can't turn and say to my client, hey man, I'm sorry, I messed up on that one. I should have objected there. And now you're getting smoked by the jury.
But I don't disagree, Mick. I think the Dallas Police Department has done a really good job of community policing. I'm not arguing for different training. I don't think things should change, but I think the number one issue that I think impacts this is the union protections. And so, because again, in this particular case, it's an extreme example. I think this guy had over a decade, maybe 5 or 6 different instances where, and
I'm not even addressing that.
To me,
it's so irrelevant to the conversation. It's such a red herring.
Keeps bad cops on the force.
Well, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the individual. Yes, that guy.
No. Right, yeah. I'm talking about the officer. So the union protected him and kept him employed, essentially. And that until you talk about that, and no one's talking about that. That's the number one. That's why I brought it up first, right? Because when you have instances
the number one issue is far too often that a person of color's interaction with a police officer will lead to a far more negative interaction than a non-person of color, whether it be violence, whether it be injury, whether it be incarceration, whether it be loss of life. That's issue number one. That's why people are marching in the street. They're not marching because the union didn't do its job. That may have been one of the reasons. But the issue one here is, and I don't want this to be hijacked and taken on another turn where we're going to make this an issue debating and discussion unions, right? If the chair of the chair of the Republican Party for the state of Connecticut, main issue and contention and only point that I've seen out thus far is about this could have been prevented if the unions weren't protecting bad police officers, is a problem in itself. I think if we all step back and first and foremost acknowledge that this individual, particularly people of color, are subjugated to a different standard and application of the law and the way they are treated by police officers across the board, by white officers, by black officers, by Asian officers, across the board. That is the problem and why people are here outside marching on the street. If you want to address unions and everything after that as a secondary issue, by all means. Well, that is not the focus at all.
I understand what you're saying. That gets to the second point, though, right? So we talk about these ticky-tack things that force cops interaction, right? So you have areas that have crime, and so there's a larger police presence, which increases the number of interactions.
Well, again, yes and no, right? Is there a larger amount of crime? There's certain crime in crime areas, but there's also police officers who are looking and stopping and checking certain people and not certain people. If you stop 20 cars, 10 of them are going to have some type of violation. If you are specifically looking to take 16 cars of people of color and 4 of non-people of color, guess what? Guess what the numbers are going to say? You're going to say these people are committing crimes at a higher rate. And I tell people all the time, the first time I saw cocaine and marijuana and drugs weren't on the mean streets of Hartford. They were in really nice dorm rooms in secondary schools and elite colleges. So if you look, you'll find it. It's the bottom line.
I don't disagree with
Look,
that.
you'll find it.
But
The laws, you have to understand. If you live in and I told people, give you a prime, I'll give you a simple example, and I'll give the show back to you, Mr.
no, man, this is
Romano.
good. This is good.
You talk about arrests for people in domestic violence, and I'll give you two examples. One, if you and I get in a fight with our wife, and occasionally people don't believe this, I do some things wrong around the house. And if my wife wants to start yelling at me, I can simply walk upstairs from the bedroom, and I'll not go to the first floor, but I'll go in the basement and I'll turn the Xbox on and I'll play Xbox. Or if she really starts yelling and I start yelling back, we'll yell at each other, and then she'll go upstairs and then I'll go to the kitchen. I live in a big house in Newington. If you live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Hartford, there's no place for person one to retreat from person two. And more importantly, if the neighbors next door putting their baby to sleep, they don't want to listen to yelling, and they pick the phone up and call the cops. So a lot of times where they're saying there's more crimes in problem areas, it's just circumstances. There's an issue. There's a case right now in front of the Supreme Court of the state of Connecticut where can police dogs walk past a motel room and smell marijuana and search those people for marijuana? Well, if so-and-so lives in Glastonbury and is smoking marijuana in their house, there's no police dog walking by the front of their house, their front door. But because these people are of an economic standard where they have to live in a motel, are they now they have a different standard of protection?
Well, no, that
under law of the state of Connecticut.
But this is what we're talking about in terms of, to me, I believe privilege exists. I think it's more centered around economic privilege. I think racism exists, but I think in every instance, if that could have been, and it's less often, Mick, don't get me wrong, but I do think that there's economic advantages, and look, I'm not trying to bring this up to be funny. But in terms of let's say someone with economic privilege can get away with something, I'm going to use, and I know Dave Chappelle made fun of him as Jesse Small, whatever his last name is. If he was just a poor black kid that did that, he would have gotten time, right? Because he's privileged, he was able to not, and nothing seems to be happening to him. Now, listen, if that's a small case, that's anecdotal.
It's anecdotal.
Yeah,
and I'll bring you back, and I'll explain to you about privilege, and I'll give you a simple example of privilege, right? I know your background. I know you've worked hard. I know you've come from a working class family. I know your family's worked hard. White privilege doesn't say that you've had an easy life. It doesn't say that you don't have struggles. It doesn't say that you don't go through things. What it says, though, when you walk into a room, though, your skin color is not one of those issues that you have to deal with. That's not an issue on your list, right? So that's not on your.
It depends on the room, Mick.
But you know what I'm saying, right? That is not your list of things that historically and fundamentally may be a challenge to you, either getting a job, either getting out of a parking ticket, either not getting stop and frisk, either not getting searched. Typically, that is not an issue for you, and that's the base level of what. So, and I know means white privilege.
No, I understand. I get that point. Like, I make the joke about depends on the room because I think you and I'm not kidding when I say this. I distinctly remember going with you and a couple other people of color to a dance at Central, and I was literally the only white guy in the room, and everyone just turned and stared. So I get that perspective. I truly do. And that's a unique experience. It's not the same thing. I'm not saying that, but I can see from your perspective walking into the room and it being.
But I'm just saying any room, right? And I'm not saying but I'm just saying the room, just in life in general. Like you have to. It's a unique. That's never anything that's typically you have to worry about in the rooms. That's what the definition for me. That's a basic level of and I say you may get that, but there may be someone who's listening to this that may not get that. And I'm saying it's not a slight to you. It's not a slight to a white person in general. It's not something that I'm trying to berate someone for, but it's just something you have to understand. On the list of things, when I have to walk into certain rooms or throughout my life, things that were going against me or were of concerns was the color of my skin. And right, I don't think it's right, but it's just a fact of life.
Well, no, and here's the thing, Mick, and I think everything's about the way we communicate and talk to each other. I think from a brand standpoint, right? If we're really trying to, and this is what I said earlier in the beginning of the show about talking past each other. Most people just talk past each other. When someone like me, and to your point is like, and this is how you know there are a lot of people, and I don't know if I want to call it racism. I think it's ignorance. If people were to look at just our backgrounds, right, like enlist where we went to high school, people would probably assume wrong that I went to Loomis and all these other things, and my father was an alcoholic and my mom basically was a single mom. Just looking at that, a lot of people would think that it was reverse, and that's what I believe is that ignorant racism, stereotypical nonsense. But for me, I think the term white privilege, I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree that is something that's real. But if we're going to have open dialogue about solutions in the problems, it comes across as the slight that you just said. So immediately someone like me is put on the defensive to say, now, wait a minute, like my father stole 10,000, like I can list all these things that made my life that much harder, and to imply, and I think that's where, and maybe the onset of when this whole notion of white privilege came about, there was this implication that you have what you have because of the color of your skin. And I think it's developed over the years, but I think I don't know whether it's the brand has to change or somehow there has to be broader conversations about it. Because at the end of the day, and this is kind of why I brought up those 2 points, I want to focus on solving these problems. Like, I love the fact that you brought up these ideas of housing, right? That people live on top of each other. And so if a cop is called for a domestic violence and they happen to be walking past a dorm or door and they smell weed, they're going to knock on that door, right? And now they have probable cause, all these other problems.
Well, I didn't exactly say that, but.
Well, but listen, it's because you're living on top of each other versus living in Glastonbury where that's not the case.
Well, you literally, there's some instances where officers literally walking down motels with dogs.
Right.
Checking.
So
like that's,
for me, one of the things that's most frustrating when, as a Republican, and I know that you're not talking for the Democratic Party, but for me, when Republicans talk about reforming things, it always stems back to we're racist. So I'll give you a prime example. One of the most frustrating things for me is Connecticut is not a school choice state. And when it comes to public housing to me is one of the things that you just said. It infuriates me that we have a single mom who's in Hartford and she wants a better education for her daughter or her son, and she's trapped because that's where her subsidy is, right? She's at the behest of these, I'd say, bad school districts, right? That her son's not getting the best possible education possible. I don't understand why, as a state, as a nation, why aren't we empowering her and saying, okay, here's $1,200. It's going into your account. You live where you want. You want to move to South Windsor, you want to move to Branford, Connecticut, and you want to rent a 1-bedroom apartment for you and your son and send your children to a better school district? Go ahead. So these are the types of things that we have to be talking about, I think, to break this system and break this grip the government has over a lot of people in poverty. Because that's the only way that we're going to stop seeing a lot of these that's just, to me, it's a lot of times these government programs, even though they're well-intentioned, are about control. You have to live in this neighborhood if you want this. Why? We have enough.
Well, I think they've done a lot to change that. I don't think that's exactly. There's a lot of housing programs where you can take your vouchers and you can live.
But it's only, but the landlord has to accept you. My point is the landlord shouldn't even know. Why does the landlord need to know that you're in a government subsidy?
Well, again, it does have to. You want to make sure that the money gets to exactly where it's supposed to get to. So I don't necessarily completely agree with that. I think we do need to do better about reclaiming and doing better with our public schools and our public school systems. I do sometimes think there may be too many schools. I think that exacerbates the biggest problem in public schools, which is resources. So if you have, 15 principal salaries, you've got 50 vice principal salaries, you got, so that's kind of, you want to have smaller.
You're starting to sound like a Republican, Mick.
Well, no, listen, again, I don't really even like labels sometimes, right? I'm a registered Democrat. I think I feel more like an independent in terms of my voting. I like to listen to people. I listen to issues. For example, my house is on I live in a really long driveway at the end of my driveway. And I lived here for 3 years. And no one's ever come up here to talk to me about my issues. And the first person that came up, she happened to be a Democrat. But when she came up to me and I said to her, I don't care what your party you are or what issue you have, I'm going to vote for you because you made the effort, right? Because I feel like a lot of politics, I think it should be effort. And I feel like it's still public service. And when you have an opportunity to do and to lead, you should lead, which is oftentimes why I take you to task, because I think that I know who you are, and I think I know what you believe in. And I feel like right now, politics, both Democrats and Republicans, it's way too personal and it's way too tit for tat. And somebody, somewhere, has got to be above it. You've got to be above the prey. It's got to be above the got you. It's got to be above that. And if it's not, then it really isn't going to get better, right? So, for example, I know we're going off topic, but let's go off topic. For example, there was the whole issue when we saw on the internet where our beloved president was talking about somehow ingesting solutions to clean the inside of your body and light, right?
We talked about this, though. We talked about this.
No. And so let's talk about it again, right? It came off. It sounded stupid. It was a stupid comment, right? And here's the thing. I understand. And I tell people, and it was so stupid that the next day he went back and said, I wasn't serious. I was being sarcastic, right? At some point, he's your guy. I get it. But if you had just said, listen, it's a stupid comment. It's live television. We're trying to solve a pandemic. People make mistakes. Let it go, right? Let it go. Rather than defending, but because people are so entrenched, right? So the left side wants to hammer him like he's the worst person ever.
And they were wrong on that, by the way.
I can't believe we are not even going to touch that.
They were,
right? Because that could be a whole
company that does it. I'm just saying.
If you are saying to me that that's what the statistic that our brilliant leader was pointing to, the one, let's just be honest, right? Listen, no one's watching.
I'm not saying he knew about the company.
Right. No one's watching. Let's be honest with each other, right? It was a stupid statement, right? But if I as let's say a left person, if I as a left person can say, listen, the guy made a mistake, he made a stupid comment. You'd prefer if he didn't make a stupid comment because there's people that will actually listen to him. So you prefer that he did it, but it was a mistake nonetheless. Then someone on the right needs to say, you know what? Yeah, he kind of stepped in it, but let's let it go. He's trying to solve.
Well, those particular comments don't even merit because here's the thing, Mick, and I'll be honest. Being in this world, I've watched how the media, even with me, right, portrays and twists things and does things in a way to, no matter at all costs, make sure that we look bad.
Right.
So the way that I can
really twisted. You have his words right there.
No, but in terms of the UV light thing, listen. In terms of the UV light thing, that is an actual. It come to find out, it's actually science.
UV light does stuff. There's people that different cancers that use UV light for. I get all of that, bro.
Right.
Trust me.
So,
but that's not what he meant, and that's not what he's talking. And even if you parse out the UV light.
But Mick, let me ask you a question. At what point is I'm sorry not enough?
Listen. I'm sorry has always got to be the start, though. It may not be enough, but if the guy gets up there, it's never going to be enough for everybody, right? But if you generally get up there and just say, hey, you know what, my guy stepped in it.
So I think that makes you on that particular look. I've said things when it merited. Like, I'm not going to comment on something like that. That to me is like, I don't even think the media should cover that, right?
But you did, and that's what my point was.
No, I talked about it in the context that the media rushed in. It wasn't the UV light thing. It had to do with the hydrochloroquine.
It was a disinfectant part. It was the disinfectant part. Trust me.
I posted about the fake study. So, but
that's why I'm just saying.
Listen, I think for me, and this is where it goes back to everyone has a different perspective on what they value and what they don't. For me, I think a lot of the policies, and we can disagree on some of the things that Trump's done, right? But for me, because I've dealt with the press and most Americans haven't, I know exactly what it's like. I mean, Mick, I've So when I had an issue with like one of my board members that's on my committee, they're not an elected official. They have no impact on public policy for cities or anything. They said stupid things online. Okay, I get it. I have to respond. They resign, fine. Meanwhile, you have elected officials on the other side of the aisle that say crazy things like, I hope that you get COVID and die. Like, I mean, and it doesn't get covered. And that's the kind of thing where I think for us, a lot of times, and this is, I think Donald Trump perspective on this and why he does what he does is because that's every day for him, right? And I'm going to give you a prime example. Joe Biden has a history of racist and sexist comments like for 50 years. And to your point, and that's why I asked how many sorries. You know, how many times does a guy say things and do things and get a pass when he says, I'm sorry? So that to me is kind of where it gets frustrating because the sorry's never enough. They always label you. And it's true. We had an example. We had a state senator who was running against a candidate that he didn't know was Jewish, get called an anti-Semite because someone who was Jewish did a mailing piece. And I was in the Washington Post being called an anti-Semite. It was insane.
And I hear you. And you could have called me and I would have defended you, right? But again, it's sometimes like that. For me, that particular issue I felt like it was a microcosm of the problem with politics, right? Which
Sure.
was both sides cared too much about a stupid thing, right? The guy in the middle said something stupid, and the people on the right side were willing to Google and pull out Encyclopedia Britannicas and look for any fact to protect it. And the people on the left were were willing to ask for his impeachment because of right. So there's just two people, and no one were sitting there and they're going past each other. And at the end of the day, it was like, you know what? Can we just all chuck it up to? And the other problem is, you say that how many sorries are enough. We have a guy that's decided that I'm never gonna say I'm sorry, right? So
to me though, some of the things that Biden have said, some of the things Biden have said and done to me, I don't understand it. I really don't.
Listen.
I think in Trump's case, you can, to your point about like the video where people can reinterpret things and intent. I think with Biden, it's really hard. I mean, when you give a speech about fighting for segregationists, I don't know how you come back from that. But he has.
I understand yes. And two things I will say is, I don't really know how we are misinterpreting what the president said on that one. So yeah, I guess we'll just table again. I think Biden has a, you know, it's the gift and the curse in terms of Biden as a candidate, right? Is that he has such a long history that of public service that he's definitely made his fair share of mistakes. But he's also able to willing to stand up to say, I've made mistakes and I'm willing to change, and I've learned from my mistakes and this, that, there. Whether you believe him or not is a decision for each individual to make at the polls. But you know, I didn't say he's my favorite candidate. Didn't say, you know, I really am actually disappointed in both parties that they couldn't have stronger or better candidates going at each other to try to take this country forward. But it's what we have. It is what it is.
It's definitely going to be an interesting year. My only hope is, and I do there, and it is true that for some reason within the African American community, Trump has made more inroads than any other Republican ever. And I do hope.
I don't know where you.
That's true.
Where do
no,
you?
it's Mick.
Again,
you can Google
I don't know where the statistics are, but you'll have. I'm
no,
sure.
No. Honestly, it is because now the Democrat
and inroads from 1% to 3% is.
No, it's actually something like 40% of African American men is the last poll. So, yeah.
I'm going to need to see those polls and figures.
No, listen, I'm not making that up, Mick. And the only reason listen, because the DNC now is actively looking to bring them back in because it's real.
Yeah, listen, I'm just going to need to see those figures. That 40% is an astronomical number. I'm going to pretty sure.
But listen, 90%, but it's something like 90%
going to say
90%.
You know what I'm saying? I have to go find 10 black people, and 4 of them are like, I'm for Trump, right? Like,
Hey,
I
listen,
don't really know.
the polls got Hillary Clinton wrong too. But I'm
Well,
saying,
that is true. But again, that was, I think that was more a product of people who were intending to vote for Trump, were, because he was so outlandish, were embarrassed to acknowledge out loud that they voted for him. And then when they got behind the
I
thing,
knew
they
he
were
was going
like,
to win. Mick, I knew.
listen, I didn't know anything. I didn't know. I did not know Hillary was going to win, though. That when people were like Hillary's going to win, I was like, yeah, I don't know. So when she lost, I was disappointed. I will be, but I was not surprised.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the best Saturday Night Live skit in probably 20 years was
Dave Chappelle and Chris
Dave
Rock,
Chappelle.
amazing.
Yeah, he is amazing. I just hope that, and it goes back to that idea of like, I'm sorry. I'm hoping more within cities start to see, particularly with this issue with police and what's happening in these communities. I'd love an opportunity to actually change and make communities of color stronger, more empowered, more economic power, more job opportunity, more entrepreneurship. I think one of the best things that I ever heard, and I know this is a big issue within the African American community, is criminal justice reform, and it was the governor of Georgia, Haley Barbour, and he said, and this is a big thing that we all have to talk about, which is we have to start to distinguish between the people we're mad at and the people that we're afraid of. And the people that we're mad at is someone who's selling illegal cigarettes or trying to pass off a $20 bill. We should be, and Georgia did a tremendous job doing this. They should be the model for all criminal justice reform. But really separating out, to me, a 13-year-old kid that's selling weed or a 14-year-old kid selling weed on the corner is probably the smartest kid. He understands how money works. He understands customer supply. And you give him a skill set. And I think education is a big problem, where I think it was Hartford, something like 20% of Hartford students go on to college. So that means that 80% are on a college track high school education that aren't going to college. And so I think there has to be some discussion about bringing in entrepreneurship, financial literacy, almost mandatory vote tech, where a student can have an option of being an electrician or a mechanic making $20, $30, $40 an hour out of high school.
Well, I 100% agree with that. There has to be, right? There has to be. You can't send overseas the HVAC job. You can't oversend a plumber. You can't send overseas
100%.
a welder, right? And that's kind of what the deterioration of this country really was, is that we've eroded. There really has been a complete and total erosion of the blue-collared middle class. We've sent all of our quality industrial labor jobs overseas. We don't make anything here anymore, right? So whose fault is it, right? Before, you used to be able to graduate from high school and you could find a job that was good enough to support you and your wife and have a couple kids, and you had a house.
Connecticut
and
had a lot of
didn't
those.
have to work, and they're gone. So again, your job is to point fingers and blame people. That's not really my thing, right? I don't know who got it wrong. I think it was wealthy Republicans and Democrats, right? I think
here's where you're right, Mick. Lowell Weicker gave us the income tax. He was Republican.
Well, yes.
And do you know why he gave us the income tax?
Why did he do that?
Did you know he lived in Greenwich?
He did.
He did live in Greenwich, and he knew if he raised capital gains tax, all of his friends would be mad. His friends in Greenwich they don't earn a paycheck, right? Everything they have is investment.
Correct.
So in his mind, we'll just raise the income tax. And that started Connecticut's on a whole,
the mass exodus. That's huge, right? Because
it's been a massive problem here in the state for a long time.
I completely totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, but what are you going to people? But when again, so as the Republicans last term had a candidate that said that he was going to get rid of the state income tax, right?
he wanted to start reducing it to eventually to elimination. Yep.
It's 50% of the state's budget. Okay, I'm not a politician, but I'm really good with numbers, right?
So let me ask you a question though, man. Why? But I'm going to go back to how people view us versus the way they view the Democratic Party. You have an entire platform, the Green New Deal, which is calling for ending of air travel and everyone being vegan, and no one bats an eye. But when Republicans, no, I'm saying, but they still listen. No one questions them. and I've dealt with this with the media. When a Republican proposes a plan, it's always like, how are you going to do it? And they all start nitpicking. Democrats say something like, we're going to do this. Everyone just kind of shrugs their shoulders like, yeah. And so that to me is frustrating. Now, could eliminating the income tax be aspirational? Absolutely. And he talked about it in a tiered way, because what I know, and this is where Bob failed, Mick, if he had said, the reason I want to reduce the income tax is because there's a single mom working as a dental hygienist in Meriden, Connecticut, and she deserves $200 more a week in her paycheck, and I want to give it to her, right? And that's what he should have said. As far as the percentage of the budget, this is the same argument that happens in the cities, it happens at the state level, anywhere there's a lot of Democrats that are in charge, there's never cuts they can make. Every program's an amazing program. All of our state and local programs have they're not incentivized the right way. So I'll give you a prime example of the mentality. Here's the difference in mentality between a Republican and Democrat. I'm going to use Obamacare. I'm not going to be critical of Obamacare, but I want to get your thoughts on this.
Let's use the Affordable Care Act. How about that? Because let me explain.
It's not affordable.
Fine.
It's not affordable for those that have to pay and are not subsidized.
Listen, I pay a lot a month and I don't get any of it. So right. I understand.
So from my perspective, and I'm not going to critique the Affordable Care Act or whatever you want to call it. What I'm going to critique is the Democrats' response. So I think it was 2 years after Obamacare was launched, Dan Malloy and his health secretary, whatever it was, had a press conference to announce that the great news that there were 100,000 new people that needed subsidies on Obamacare. Now, why is that great news? That now we have 100,000 people in the state of Connecticut that have fallen below a threshold that they need subsidized insurance, but they were celebrating that fact. Versus, from my perspective, our government agencies should be celebrating someone getting off and getting opportunity and not needing the subsidy. So that is basically sums up that entire perspective. I will never forget, Mick, they had a press conference.
I don't know what you speak of. So again, your ear is way to the ground.
One of those memories.
Well, one of those things, as I said, I don't know if they were celebrating 100,000 people were now going to have health insurance that wouldn't have health insurance in the past. Again, I don't know, because there's people that are straddling. There's people who, and this is the problem with people don't understand, which the point of the Affordable Health Care Act was, right? So people think it's all poor people and blah, blah, blah. It's really not. Poor people, quote unquote, let me throw poor people. Poor people don't care. If they have a stomach ache, they're going to the ER.
I know.
Doesn't matter. They get a $1,000 bill. They put it in the pile next to it. Is it going to cut the cell phone off? Is it going to cut their cable off? Nope. And it goes over here. That's more for the guy that's working a 9 to 5 and maybe has a part-time job. And guess what? He's got appendicitis. And now he's got a $10,000 bill and they're trying to collect it. Is that guy going to have to declare bankruptcy? So people don't even really, a lot of times, even understand. They think that, oh, this is just this handout and is for poor people. But no. That's not. I'm just, again, I'm not speaking to you. There are more. It's not just you and I here. There are people who are listening and think that what certain things are for, and it's like, a lot of people don't even understand the nuances and at least what the intentions were, right?
Well, no, and this goes
now,
back.
Did it follow through? Was it executed correctly? But the intentions, right?
Sure. Listen, but to me, the words you never want to hear, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. So I understand your point, but for me, I'm just using that at highlighting the mentality. So when you have a state agency who's solely designed to get more people on aid, and basically, not that we shouldn't be helping people, that's not what I'm saying, but when you're incentivized to basically get more people government assistance versus get them off government assistance. When I mean get them off government assistance, I mean make them food secure, financially secure, house secure. We should be more invested in uplifting than status quo. Because here's what ends up happening when you do the status quo. And I, again, loving Dave Chappelle, I just watched, when he talked about that book about the pimp from the 1940s. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but him describing it kind of reminded me of the relationship with Democrats or the government and many people in poverty. They give you something.
Don't do that.
Huh?
You might want to cut this out. Don't do that.
No, hear me out. They give you food stamps, or they give you housing. And then the moment that you get a little something on your own, they take it from you, all of it. And so there's no plan.
That's legitimately, there have been scholarly books written on this, with the welfare and the welfare system is actually set up. It's not necessarily
Correct.
but it's set up, it's for the workforce, right? When there's not enough work for people, the government expands it. And when we need more of a workforce, then we cut it and make it more restriction. And it's not for the good of the people, it's for the good of the democracy, i.e., if you have as Dr. King says, if you have a segment of the population that do not feel that they have a stake in this population and this country, then they will not defend it. They will not take care of it. They will burn it down. The welfare state is to prevent anarchy.
Yeah, but I'm not.
Right?
But Mick, I'm not saying get rid of the welfare state.
But
That's
no,
not what I'm
but
saying.
what you're saying, you're kind of saying that they're expanding it for the purposes of keeping them dependent on the Democratic Party. I don't think so.
Well, I'm not. No, that's a conspiracy. I'm not saying conspiracy theory. I'm saying it's actually the free market that exists. So someone gets hired by a government agency to administer benefits, and they go out there and they find as many people to get on this government benefit as possible, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're self-interested.
And that's their job, right? And in order to justify their job, they have to go out and find all these people, which that's the way the system's set up. What I'm saying, it's set up wrong. My point is that we should have people out there, retrained, education, all these people that are getting government subsidies, and then gradually allow them off. Meaning the more that they earn, and if you, let's say, for example, you're a single mom and you want to go back to school, I'll pay for that. You want to go learn how to be a mechanic.
But listen, JR, for what? We don't listen to me. This is what this country has done. I mean, let me tell you about.
But I'm saying that's a solution. I know where we're at.
Let me tell you about the big conspiracy about this country, right? If everybody who went to high school and graduated expected that they should be able to provide for themselves, provide for their families, make a livable wage, and have decent and affordable housing, if everyone who graduated high school believed that, we'd burn this country down. Because we cannot, as a country, support that. We don't have the jobs. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have it. So systematically, in my opinion, humbly, conspiracy theory time for me, is that we've eroded the expectations of a large segment of this population. We have created,
I don't disagree,
intentionally or unintentionally, either by our police system, by our education system, and by our meritocracy system, have destroyed a level of expectation in a large segment of our population. And these are white people too.
Yeah, right?
And we've created an underclass. And that's the only way that this thing works.
Mick, it was really funny. Well, it's funny. It's actually, the business was in Newington. So a couple of years ago, when I think it was the government shutdown, I got a phone call about how they were limiting food stamps. There was a single mom who was being featured in this it was a Channel 30 interview, and they came to me. Of course, they're like, "Oh," so I heard her story, and I was like, "You know what? This is terrible." I go and I find her a job. So I'm dealing with the reporter. I find her a job paying $17 an hour, $18 an hour. This was like 10 years ago. And to the reporter's shock, she didn't want the job. And so, and this wasn't like a minimum wage job. This was working in a factory in Newington, but it wasn't like a hard, like this. It was just like boxes and things like that. She refused the job because she wanted to stay home and be with her son. And so now you get into this question of, and this goes back to my point, there's always going to be people that, and I understand what you're saying in regards to there's not enough jobs, but my point is there are people within that system that don't want to be in the system, and there's no way for them to get out.
And there's people that want to stay in the system, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm not complaining about that.
Who are collecting, right. COVID,
I don't think we do enough.
The $600 on top of whatever the unemployment is, and they're making $250 more a week than they were when they were employed, and they will never go back to work until the train falls off. Right?
Yeah, no, but my point is,
if you're paying $400 a week for child care, I mean, you can't. ask that woman why. If you now tell her, well, listen, if I go to work, I got to spend $400 a week for childcare. I gotta send formula to him instead of breastfeeding, so that's an additional $100. So it doesn't make sense. So
this
for some
place
people,
this was a big fact.
right? But for some people, right? So you have to say, like, she's the outlier, right? Or that person. For a lot of people, it doesn't make sense because there's no affordable. They're not. It's not affordable.
Well, but that goes back to my point about the way we have to reform that system. And when Republicans talk about reforming the system, we get called racist. So this goes back.
No, not always. Depends on how you say it and when you say it and where you say it and how you say it. Right? It's Nick, like I think you and I. But I'm going to tell you right now, if I were to stand up tomorrow and say we need welfare reform, I guarantee, from across the aisle, I'd be called a racist. That I'm trying. I don't think you would be. I don't think you would be. I think it's the way you do it and the way you say it. If you put a steak in a garbage can lid, it's still it's a steak, but it's on a garbage can lid. It's all about the way you right. You know, rest in peace, Bill Cosby. Great episode. But you know what I mean? It's really about how you make the argument, and if you frame it in a certain way.
Listen,
really
I appreciate that. I've had the argument about the education system with a group of and they're white liberals, and they said you can't. And I'll never forget this, Mick. I was talking about like how we should be doing more VOTEC, more financial literacy, having a different track for those that may be in a situation where they know they're not going to college because of what home life, whatever it may be. We just kind of leave them to fend for their own and then are shocked when all of a sudden they're in the system when they had no opportunity, no training, you know, and everyone's like, oh, what happened? And I'll never forget this woman said to me, you can't expect them to make those hard decisions when they're like in 8th grade. And I looked at her and you know my background, and I go, so hold on a second. So wealthy white kids can decide to go between I think I said Hopkins or Madison High School. But to ask someone in an urban community and give them more choices in what they want to do with the rest of their life is somehow, I mean, it's crazy when you try to have those discussions.
Well, did you hear what you just said though? You said Madison and Hopkins High School, right? They're going to be all right either way where they're going.
No. What I'm saying is that no one would ever think that it's too much. That's too much burden on a student who's deciding between Madison High School and Hopkins High School. And what the liberal woman was implying, that asking an African American in New Haven in 8th grade if they want to be a mechanic or go to college is too much. They can't handle it. I was like, I
think that is a big decision. I mean, at the age of 13, you're a different individual, right?
Wait a minute.
I mean, I think
I'm gonna tell you right now, Mick, growing up the way that I grew up, knowing the people that I know, if I was 14 or 15 years old or 13 years old, 12 years old, knowing the family life that I had, if it was a tough family life and I was already working to help my mom put food on the table, I might take a VOTEC opportunity to be an electrician and make $35 an hour getting out of high school. Like
you might, but you might not know, right? Like you and then that may prevent the next brilliant mind who just didn't know. Like you just it is. I think
I get your point.
I don't think it's as overblown as she says, but I don't think it's as simple as you think either. It is a big decision in life to decide that.
But your computer's probably dying, and I gotta get on this.
I just plugged into the wall. Yes.
I gotta jump on a 7 o'clock. Hi.
You say hi. Just say hi. Say hi. Hold on. Well, listen.
Oh, you're gonna be trouble for your dad.
Yes, she is. Well, listen. We will do this again soon, hopefully.
Yes.
It's a good discourse, and I just if I did have an opportunity to say something, is, you know, this is a trying time in society, and I think this could be a turning point, and we need leaders to lead, right? We need people to lead, and I look to people like you, and especially in your position, because I know you and I know your heart, and I know that you know better, so I expect you to do better. There are people that are and I'm being honest. There are people who are Republicans that you read in these certain town pages, and you listen to the things they say, and you watch these memes, and I wouldn't even. That's what I expect from them, and I wouldn't even begin to have a discussion or try to open their mind or change their mind and make a difference. But you have the gift of being in a position where you can make something happen, and I think you have the responsibility to make something happen. So when something like this comes out, I want to see something from the chair of the Republican committee that says, you know, we support You can say, you know, we understand our police department have a difficult job, but we understand that Black Lives Matter, and that, you know, there are instances far too often where they're being treated differently, and at some point we need to address that, right? I expect that from leadership. I don't expect you guys to make you know, Mr. Floyd a martyr, X, Y, but I expect that there is at least a basic, I guess, understanding and acceptance, and realizing that a large part of the country, and it may not be your constituents, but it is your fellow Americans, are hurting and are feeling like no one's listening to them, and acknowledge that. And that's what I asked.
And listen, Mick, I completely appreciate that. And I think when we talked offline, I said one of the things that I think is a little grotesque for a lot of politicians, and even companies now do it, is that they run to this kind of like, and it's all about self-gratification, where they're like putting out these statements that mean nothing. They're not advocating any change. They're just kind of saying things. And I knew in a lot of my not private, but some of the things I was posting in discussions, and I just feel like we're now like in a day and age where you just have to kind of check the box, right? That, oh, I made a comment and I'm done. I wanted to be more thorough, and I wanted to have an opportunity for a discussion, because I do listen. I think there's certainly, and I don't agree with 100% of some of what the Black Lives Matter movement is asking for. I think what's happening in Seattle is completely insane, and I think it takes away from the discussion to solve problems. It's just a distraction. But I think there's value, and there is truth to, not, again, I don't agree with everything, but I think there's truth in seeing the flaw. I mean, that's what's great about America. We always haven't gotten it right, but we do try to improve. We try to work on and make it better, and it's not going to be perfect. And we have to strive for perfection. But the only way we get that is through discussion and sometimes disagreement. But I really do appreciate you coming on, and I think we can make this either bi-weekly or monthly if you want. And because I think it'd be great to have just another perspective in the talk to you. So I appreciate it, Mick.
Thanks for having me, bro.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and tuning in. I appreciate it, and share.